Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this training on the creating and modifying of resource records in ArchivesSpace. I'm Brittany Newberry, the Music and Popular Culture Archivist from Georgia State University, and I'm joined today by my fellow trainer, Corey Schmidt from the University of Georgia. So at the end of this training, you should know how to create, edit, and delete resource records and their component records in ArchivesSpace, learn how to create sub-records, gain knowledge of how to spawn, merge, suppress, and link resource records to other record types in ArchivesSpace, become familiar with import and export options for resource records in ArchivesSpace, better understand how to modify user preferences, apply default values to resource records, and other time-saving tips. In advance of this training, you received an email with an agenda for the training with links to all of the materials you will need to participate in this workshop and to continue learning after the training is over. It should be a Google Drive folder like this one. It should have the agenda as well as the workbook, a sample import document, the sample description that you can use to create the records and that we will be using today in this workshop, and then a bulk import for loading via spreadsheet, which we will go over later in the workshop. We may not stick exactly to the agenda, but we will take the 2 planned breaks included in the agenda at the appropriate time. So we've already showed you what's included in the workbook, but it does include exercises that you can try after the training is complete. You can complete those exercises either within your own ArchivesSpace instance or in the ArchivesSpace sandbox, which I'll share a link to in the chat. You can access the ArchivesSpace sandbox from the ArchivesSpace Getting Started website, which is linked at the bottom of your agenda. In addition to the course materials in the Google Drive, you've also been provided with a list of resources at the bottom of your agenda about using ArchivesSpace and ArchivesSpace membership that you may find useful. These are our most frequently used resources and good references to have on hand for the future. There's also a training evaluation, and the end of the agenda, at the end of the training, we hope you complete that evaluation. So we are using Zoom webinar for this training, and your microphone and camera are both muted. If you'd like to ask questions of the trainers, we ask that you use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. If you have a general question or need some other form of assistance, please feel free to reach out in the chat. Some questions will be read and answered during allocated time for Q&A. We are using the latest version of ArchivesSpace for this training, which is version 3.2. If you are currently using an earlier version of ArchivesSpace, keep in mind some of the features you see today may not be available to you at home. We also won't be able to troubleshoot issues with your own implementations of ArchivesSpace at your organization. If you have a question or issue with your implementation, please email ArchivesSpace at archivespacehome@lyrasis.org, which we will put in the chat. Also keep in mind, this workshop assumes prior experience with ArchivesSpace and familiarity with ArchivesSpace terminology and understanding of how to navigate the ArchivesSpace staff user interface. If you don't have this necessary background, I recommend reviewing the recording of a recent ArchivesSpace Basics training linked on the ArchivesSpace Getting Started webpage. Finally, please keep in mind that there are around 20 participants in this workshop coming from a variety of institutions and experience levels. Remember that the ArchivesSpace Code of Conduct applies to all ArchivesSpace events, including virtual events. Please remember to be considerate and respectful in your interactions with your fellow participants, Corey and myself, in the Q&A and chat. And so with that, Corey and I are going to introduce ourselves. I'm going to go first, and then Corey will introduce himself and give his background, and then we will get started with the training. So as I said, I'm Brittany Newberry, the Music and Popular Culture Archivist at Georgia State University in Atlanta. Prior to this current job I have, I was a processing archivist at the Atlanta University Center, where I managed the ArchivesSpace instance there. I did the trainings, created workflows, manuals, documentation, all of that good stuff. I'm also a former member and chair of the ArchivesSpace User Advisory Council, where I help with the development, usability testing, testing in general of the application. And I have been an ArchivesSpace trainer for the past 2 years. So I'm excited to be here and teach you how to do resource records. Corey, feel free to introduce yourself.
Hello, thank you, Brittany. Like she said, my name is Corey Schmidt. I am the project management librarian / archivist at the University of Georgia. Prior to taking on that role, I was the ArchivesSpace project manager at the University of Georgia, where I led and coordinated an effort to migrate the Hargret and Russell libraries from Archivist Toolkit into ArchivesSpace. And throughout that process, I worked with both libraries to adjust their workflows, to migrate their workflows, to conduct data cleanup, and really sort of get to know ArchivesSpace both from the staff user interface side and as well as the back end. I've been participating in ArchivesSpace presentations, workshops, etc. for the past 2.5 years, and I'm very excited to be a part of this training session. This is my first time giving a training workshop, so for all you participants, please be patient and understanding. I would greatly appreciate it, and I look forward to sharing our knowledge with you.
Thank you, Corey. So I will start the training now. So in the chat, you should see links for the Google Drive where you can access the agenda and other resources, as well as the code of conduct, the ArchivesSpace website, and the Getting Started page. Some of these links are on the agenda, but just in case you need them now, those have been provided, as well as the sandbox link and the email for ArchivesSpace home at lyricist.org. So to begin with, we're going to go over how to create a resource record at the single level. So this workshop does assume that you have some knowledge of the ArchivesSpace staff user interface, and you will see in the workbook that there is some more overview of the functionality of ArchivesSpace at the beginning of the workbook, but we will not be going over that today. In the training, we will go over certain things in regards to that. So to create a resource record, there are some various ways to do such. You can go to the Create menu, click on the drop-down, and choose Resource. You'll see that there's a line separating these 3 types of records from the others. That means that whatever created above the line is created for this specific repository. And anything below the line is created for all repositories in your implementation. So when you create a resource record in this repository we're currently in, which is RC, it will only be for this repository. And it will display on the public user interface, regardless of what repository you're in, as long as you click publish. So all repositories will display on the public user interface, as long as they are public. So, and then you can also create resource records from the browse resources. Sorry about the little slowness of my internet. So from here, you'll see the list of already created resources, but you also see this Create Resource button here. So if you are browsing resource records and you see that the one you want is not created and you need to create a resource, you can always click here. You can also do other things within this list. You can actually search through these resources. You can view and edit the ones already created, and you can sort these. We will go over preferences for these browse columns later in the training. You can also filter by subject on the side here. You can see there's a lot. You can also see which ones are published and what language they are in. I would like to add that all of the records in This instance, as well as the sandbox instance, which has the same record, have been generously provided to us by ArchivesSpace community members. So these are actual collections in others' ArchivesSpace repositories. So if you happen to be one of those who graciously volunteered your data for the Inclusive Examples project, we want to thank you. And each record has an acknowledgement for the where it came from for that institution, and so just an acknowledgement note, which we'll show you later. So that's the second way to create from Browse. Click on Create. The third way is to go into an accession record, and then you would spawn from that accession. We're not going to go over spawning today. If you are interested in how to spawn from an accession record, I recommend going to the ArchivesSpace YouTube channel and viewing past workshop recordings. They will go over how to create accession records, as well as how to spawn from an accession to another accession and from an accession to a resource record, and what data gets transferred over. So we're going to go back to Create and click on Resource. So the resource record we're going to create today, I'll show you in this example data. So this is a sample collection description data. And the resource we're going to create today is for the Richard Lewis the Holt collection, which is data from one of the volunteer institutions. So this is all available to you in that Google Drive, and you can use it to create example collections. So we have all this information about him and the collection in this description. So when you are creating a resource record, and really when you're creating any record in ArchivesSpace, you will see that there are required elements in that record. So in those required elements are always have red asterisks. You will also see if you scroll over a field, if you scroll over the title for that field, such as title, you will see that it says that it's required, but also give you examples as well as the DAX standard. So most of these fields are DAX compliant and EAD compliant. So these become EAD records, and you can export the EAD, which we'll go over later in the training. And you can import it as well. So these are called tooltips. These are configurable for your instance and can be done in the back end, but we are not going over today. If you're interested in that, I recommend looking into your config file and talking with your system admin, because you can customize these for your institution. So every time you scroll over one, it will give you whether it's required and examples of it. So you see that's required for this resource record is title, identifier, level description, and as you continue to scroll down, you see more. And we'll go over what's required as we fill out this record. As you're in certain fields, you'll see some open text, and you'll see that you have the ability to drag and make this smaller or larger, depending on how much text you're adding to it. So we are working on Richard the Holt. So I'm gonna copy his name from here, just so I can just copy and paste. Oh, I hate that. I'm just gonna type it. So we're gonna call this the Richard the Holt collection. And I apologize if I'm saying his name wrong. We're gonna give it an identifier, which up here, that looks to be the identifier A0058. So in the identifier section, you are given 4 fields that you can fill in with identifier information. So if you want dashes between the numbers and letters in your identifier, you would put information in here, like we say that's 34. I didn't want to add a pound. So we'll say this is M 3418. When you save this, those become dashes. So there's a dash between each block. So that's how it's represented on like the public side and such. Or it becomes periods if you change it over that. So if you want everything to stay grouped together, you would put it in the same block. You are not required to use at all 4 blocks. It's really how you as an institution decide to use the identifier. So we're going to call this A0058. And you do not have to do the exercises along with me. It's probably best if you watch what I'm doing and then do it later on, maybe today or tomorrow. This is being recorded and will be made available to you later after this training, but not like right after. But you should be notified when the recording is available. So that's the second required element. Next is the level of description. So you see that you have a lot of ones to choose from. And since we are starting at the top of the resource record, which is itself the collection level of a finding aid. So we would call this the collection, but also remember that a collection doesn't have to be multiple items. A collection can be a single item, a single file folder. And if you want to just represent that, if you have a lot of single item collections like artifacts and such, you can choose items. If you call your collection fonts, that's an option as well. If this is record group and related to your organizational files or to your university files, those kind of records, you have that option as well. If you make a finding aid for every series, you can start at that level. So it's not required that you call this collection, but just know that this is the top level of the resource record. And so whatever level of description you start with is what you need to put in this level of description. And next, but not required, is the resource type. So what type of resource is this? Is in our official collection of materials that were donated, but they're not the creator? Is it the papers of this person, the materials they created? Is it a lot of publications like pamphlets and leaflets, but weren't created by the donor? Is it records from an institution, organization, the university, that kind of thing? So this is not required, but some institutions do like to add this because it helps them, and it is like a DAX thing that you can do. So we're going to choose, let me look back at the description. So these were donated by someone else. You can see that they were donated by Michael Bonesteel. So that means that they weren't donated by the creator of the material. So it's a collection because it was put together by Michael rather than Richard. And that goes into title as well. But if you're interested in standards on like creating titles and such and choose the type of resource, look into DAX and other archival resources like that. So the next thing you can do is click publish. So everywhere you see a publish box, you can check it and it will publish this level of the finding aid or this part of the finding aid. You'll see throughout that different sub-records of this have different areas where you can publish them. So you do not have to check them everywhere you go. You'll see once we save this that there will be a place for you to click publish all, and I'll show you that later. I want to point out as you scroll down, this navigation panel on the left-hand side follows you. And so as you get further down, you'll see what the languages and dates, and you're able to also click on these and it will take you to that section of the resource record or the record you're in. And it will tell you how many are in that, like how many languages, sub-records you've added, that kind of thing. So I just wanted to point that out. You do also have a restriction apply in this basic information field. This is for you to note if this collection has any restrictions, both use and access. So you would check this if you know that, oh, people can't make photocopies of parts of this collection, and we want them to know it from the collection level. Or they can't access this right now, so this is a restricted collection, but we want to make the finding aid, that kind of thing. You can check this box, and then in the notes section later on, you can add access notes. But you have the ability to check restrictions, this restrictions box, from any level of the finding aid. And I'll show you that as we move forward. So if you check it here, it will show up in certain reports, but you can also check it later on. We tend to, when I was at the AUC, we would check it in this part if there were any restrictions at all for the collections, not if it was just the whole collection, but that's up to you at your institution to decide when you will use what boxes, because here you can do just the required elements or you can add more in. And then you'll see that there's a repository processing note. This is an internal note that applies to the processing of this collection and can be found when you're searching through, but it does not get published. It won't be published on the public side. You won't see it that way. This is for you to note things that you think people should know about the processing or about the finding aid. At Georgia State, we add if we edited the collection, if we've updated some restrictions in regards to collection, and we add our initials and the year that it happened. So when people are looking at the collection, they're like, oh, this got changed in this year. So we know, and we can look at those initials and know who did it if we have questions about it. And then we get to languages. So languages, if you're not on version 2.8.0 or 2.8.1, they might not look like this, but this has been new since then. And you have the ability to add multiple languages as well as a language note. For the top level of your resource record, you are required to have at least one language. However, you can delete this. You can remove the subrecord, but as you know, this is applying to the language of the material and not the finding aid itself, not what you're writing the finding aid is. So it's good to let people know what language the materials they wish to view are in. You can type ahead. So if it's English, you can type ahead. You can also browse, and it lists pretty much all languages in the ISO standards. And as I said, you can have more than one. And then you can add script. So what script is the language of the materials in? That is not a required part of the subrecord, but it might be something that you want to add. So like with English, you know that it's written in, the script is Latin. And as you go through, you might be like, I'm not sure what it means by languages and what I can do with a language note. So you always see these question marks that we do to the Help Center. And the Help Center is only for members of ArchivesSpace. So if you are a member, you can create an account and access the Help Center. And there's also a link to the Help Center in your agenda. So that can just help you to further explain these fields. Okay. And if you want to add more languages, you just keep clicking add language on the bottom or add language at the top. You can delete them by clicking the X and either canceling because you don't want to delete or clicking confirm removal. Or you can add a language note up here or below. This is note type is language of materials. It's the only option you have here. You can keep it as language of materials that would appear as the label on the public side and then your printed PDF finding it, or you can change the label here. It's not required. And then persistent ID gets filled. And then you can choose to publish here. This is another like publish check mark. If you know that there's certain notes and subrecords that may have one of these publish check marks that you don't want published, you may not want to use that publish all button that I'm going to show you later. And you may want to go through and individually check them. It's really up to you. And then you'll see in the notes that you have the ability to add content. So when you're creating this note, all you see is that's required is note type and content. So when you open up subrecords as you go through creating your finding aid, you will see that more requirements are added based on the subrecord you open. So because they all have their own individual requirements outside of just the resource record having required elements. But if you don't want, so if you were to go and save this, you will see a lot of red. And red means it can't save it because you are missing required elements. And it will show you we're missing this. And if you click on that, it will take you to that missing element. So in extent, we're missing the number, that kind of thing. So in order to save, and I recommend saving often, you may want to fill out all required fields in your record and then save, and then go back and add what you wasn't required to save the record. So before you add more sub-records that weren't required, go and fill out the whole record. So you can do that. And then you'll get nice breeding. I'll show you that. So when it comes to language and materials note, if you add a language and materials note, you can add content, and you'll see that there is tags, that this is mixed content enable. And if you put in a tag, you will get options for that tag. So you can emphasize with italics, bold. You can make it a subject, block quote. You can add person names, that kind of thing, a title, hyperlinks. You can do those tags in your note field, but you can do it in other fields. You can do it in your title. You just have to be aware of what the tag looks like, but it will start it for you. So if you choose this one, sorry. I don't know why it's not letting me select it. Normally lets you select it. And once you've started, it will give you the beginning and end of that tag, and you can fill in the middle. So you'll make sure it gets completed. But it won't error that for you. Like, it will show you that it's not completed in this note, but you can still publish this with that error. So just be aware of that, and to quality check your finding aids, especially if you're using tags. And then you'll see you have the ability to add a content item. So a content item is just adding more of these content fields, like adding another content field for more paragraphs if you want them to be separated and all that. You're not required to add content or more than one content field, but depending on the note, you might be required to add this content, like to explain this collection. The materials in this collection are in both English and Spanish. That's why these notes are great, because if you have multiple languages, you can add a language, a materials note, and both all the languages as languages to the finding aid, and then explain, well, the correspondence series is both in English and in Spanish, or there's publications in German and English and Spanish, so they are aware of it. And then as you get further into your collection, you can add specific languages to those as well, and I'll show you that. So we're going to delete this note altogether. Now we're going to go to dates. So this is the dates of the materials in the collection. So it's not the date of the finding aid when you were creating this, it's the dates of the material. So if we go back to the collection description, we can see through all the like correspondence and stuff like that, we have like 1974, 22, 1945, 2014, 1990, 1978. We have some undated. So we're going to say this ranges from what looks like 1922 to 2014. You can always go back and edit this, especially if you've started this, and then when you get to your series, you realize the dates are more specific. But it's just important to fill out the information so you can save it. So then you are required, when it comes to dates, to either have an expression or a type. It can be one or the other, or it can be both, but you must have either or. So it's a conditional required field. And this means if you have an expression, then choose inclusive dates, you're not required to fill out the begin and end. But if you choose the type and don't have an expression, you must fill out begin and end in order for it to have those dates. I will say that expression is the human readable part of dates. So if people are looking at the finding aid and see the expressions, are like, oh yes, so there's collection materials in this that range from 1922 to 2014. But if you put things in the begin and end, they can typically be human readable, but these are also machine readable. So it knows that files in this collection are from 1922 to 2014. And when people search for specific years in between these days, this collection will appear because it knows that there are materials with those dates. And then you have the ability, so I always recommend doing both. So you can have an expression and the beginning and end, because so you can have the human and machine version of it. So it works for both. And people can easily find things in your archive space, public side or whatever you use for people to look at finding aids. So then you can also add certainty, like this is the approximate date, that kind of thing, error, and the calendar that you're using, which only gives 2 options. So a lot of this doesn't get used. If you know these are circa dates, you can add text in the expression, but you can't add anything but numbers and the dashes. So this is year, year, month, or year, month, and day, like how it is. And that's the DAC standard that gets used. Okay, and then the next required field is extent, and this is the size of your collection. How many linear feet? How many cubic feet? How many gigabytes? Is it a single item? Is it just cassettes? Like, this is how you measure the extent and physical size, or digital if it's a completely digital collection, or if it has parts that are digital. This is that size. So you can have whole and part of extent. Whole refers to the whole collection, the size of all of it, and then part refers to a specific section, part of it. So say you have part of your collection is 25 gigabytes of photographs. You can choose part and 25, choose gigabytes, and container summary that can list the container summary. You can say it's 1,000 or 10,000 JPEGs for this. And then you can give physical details, that's more replies to your boxes, and dimensions, which is dimensions of the boxes and stuff like that. And then you can add another extent, and that can be a part as well, and that can be the actual like linear feet of what is physical. And you can go through the same process. And I recommend if you're going to have parts, you need to have the whole as well. And usually most people, when they're at the collection level, just do whole, and this refers to however you measure. So we'll say, based on this collection, that it is approximately 2.5 linear feet. We have that already there. So we will go in here. We'll say the whole is 2.5, and this requires decimals, and it usually allows you to go of several numbers afterwards, but you should use decimals and not like 2/1/2. And then you will choose linear feet. And then in container summary, we've been given in our description that 3 legal size document boxes and 1 oversized box. So we'll add that to this. You do not have to add the parentheses. When it publishes on the public side, when you see it over there, it adds parentheses to this part of the extent. Sorry. And 1 oversized. 3 legal document boxes. And you might see that I have green and red lines showing up, like I have Grammarly happening. That is not an ArchivesSpace thing, that is my browser. ArchivesSpace doesn't really do spell check. I recommend putting things in Notepad and Word docs before copying them into ArchivesSpace. It's best to work from a different document and then add it to ArchivesSpace. That way you can edit and see like spell check and everything. But you can install the Grammarly extension, and it will help you out if you're using a certain browser. So you can use it and it will tell you, oh, this is spelled wrong, or this grammar doesn't make sense. It can be annoying, but it's helpful. So that's what we have for extent. And then the next section is finding aid data. This section is only at the top level of a collection. You won't find it when you're adding your series and sub-series to finding aids because it's about the overall collection itself, or at least this top portion of it. So here you can add the EAD ID, and this is great for if you're importing via spreadsheet, the bulk import tool. You will need an EAD ID, or you'll need a link, another form of ID, which so URI. It's easy to put this in. A lot of people, maybe when migrating over to ArchivesSpace, were using EAD, and that number will be imported into this field. You can also say where it's located, but it's not a required portion. Also, here's where you can add the finding aid title, like what this is called. So we can say this is the Richard Holt collection. And then at institutions I'm at, we like to add like the dates to it, the overall dates for it. So it's like the complete title of this collection. But you can also add a subtitle. Where I'm at now, we put the person's name in this part of the title, and then the subtitle is a guide to the collection at Georgia State University. And this way, it's like when people download or print the finding aid in a PDF form, that's what shows up at the top is the finding aid title and the subtitle, and they'll see Richard Holt, a guide to the collection at Georgia State University. And it's more user friendly for us at Georgia State. But how you fill these out is totally based on your institutions and your policies. And then the filing title is important for how it sorts in ArchivesSpace. So if you want everything to appear in that indirect order, so the Holt, Richard collection, once this is saved, when we go and browse, it will sort, and if it's sorting by title, it will sort the Holt rather than Richard as that default value, if it's like sorting based on the alphabetical order. And that's how it's filed there, so you can find it if that's how you like to find it. But if you don't want a filing title, it will go based on the name of the collection. And then finding a date is a date this was created. So we're going to say this doesn't have a set format. It can be DAX compliant or just how you prefer to write dates. And then the finding aid author, you can add your name, or you can leave it blank. You can say this finding aid is prepared by, that kind of thing. Then description rules is the rules that this finding aid was created using. So we're going to say DAX, describing archives, a content standard. But as you can see, there are other options. We have RDA, and then various other ones apply that people internationally use for describing archives and the standards. So the only two required fields of this is language of description and script of description. So language being the language this finding aid is written in. Again, you can type a header browse, and then script of description being the script this collection is in, so Latin. Then you can also add a language of description note. If you wrote this finding aid in both English and Spanish, you can say this finding aid has two versions, one English and one in Spanish, in this language of description note. The sponsor is a good field for those who have this collection done maybe because of a grant or because of funding that was provided from a donor. You can add that to the sponsor field. And then you can say also in this section, the addition statement, like what addition of this finding is, series statement, and then you have finding aid status. This is great if you're like documenting the level your finding aids are at, like, are there a lot of finding aids in progress? Are they completed? I will say that there's a report that is based, that goes on, that does like this kind of work, but it's an event record that you have to do, and we won't be going over that, but if you're interested in events, please check out the Help Center if you're a member. It will go over that. And then, so we can say that this is in progress. If it's completed, you can go to completed. under revisions, that kind of thing. I will say that if you're importing things, some of these fields will import things from the things that you have. So some of these aren't the typical like ones that you find, they were imported from other records. And then you can add a note about your finding aids. This can be a general note that you just want to make sure gets covered. And so those are all the required fields. I'm going to click Save Resource so we can save this and make sure it gets saved, because ArchivesSpace will time out on you. It's generally like an hour as a default. So if you don't save things and you walk away, you will lose all of your work. So just keep that in mind. So when you do save, you get this nice little green box that says Resource Richards the Whole Collection was created. And you now see that you have all these buttons available to you. So enable reorder mode, add child, load via spreadsheet, rapid data entry. We're going to go over all those at a certain point. This is the event drop down. This is where you can add various things, various events that happened with this collection. This is the publish all button. If you click this, everything that has a publish checkbox in it, all the subrecords will be published and made available on the public side. Unpublish all will unpublish all of those checkboxes, and then they will not be seen. Export we'll go over later, but these are exporting like CAD and other things. You can merge this with another collection, transfer it to another repository, and then you have the ability to calculate extent, dates, and create assessments. If you're interested in assessments, there was a previous workshop on that, and that recording is available via YouTube, the ArchivesSpace YouTube channel. And then calculating extent can be, if you're interested in space management, that's definitely where that's talked about. And that's a workshop coming up for the ArchivesSpace member forum. Suppress and delete are two buttons that not everyone will see. This toolbar will not be shown to everyone. It is based on your permission level. So all the records in ArchivesSpace can be edited and created by system admins, but once you get into different permission levels, you will start not seeing a lot of things or only having access to certain things. So we're in admin, so we're all system admins in the sandbox. And while I'm working in this, I am a system admin. So I see all the things. So suppress and delete may not be available to your students if you don't want them to have it, because this means they can suppress the collection from view from the public side, even if it's been published, as well as suppress it from users in the staff interface if they don't have permission to see suppressed records. And this is for collections that you may not want. You want to create a finding aid, but it's not available to the public yet. And you don't, and it might be something that you need to keep between certain people in organizations. Really suppress we use for restricted series and files when I was at the AUC. And delete allows you to delete the whole collection. And you don't want everyone to have the ability to delete. But when you do click on it, it will ask you if you really want to delete this record before you can click the delete button. So not everyone will be able to see that, but I wanted to point it out. Before I go into notes, I wanted to see if anyone has any other questions. Or any questions, actually. Corey, do you mind reading questions if there are any?
Sure, yeah. We do have a question from Joan. I may be mispronouncing your name, Kerbau. I think she's asking when to use how to express certainty or uncertainty in the dates fields, though she says specifically, instead of if I say 1970s and the date field is at a single date or an inclusive date. That
Okay.
I'm not sure if that's an ArchivesSpace or a practices question, though.
That is a practices question. You do have the ability in the expression to just say 1970s, but you want this to be as understandable by who's using it as you can. So you might want to say circa 1970 through 1979. That is an inclusive date, and then you can add the begin of 1970 and 1979 and the begin and end. that's our standard practice where I've been. DAX will also go over that standard. If you use DAX, there's the standard for dates. Yeah, DAX 2.4 will tell you about dates and how to write circa and undated and that kind of thing. And if it's single or inclusive. Generally, if it's a whole year and not just a month, day, and year, I like to call it inclusive and give like that span. I hope that answers the question. But it is a practice thing, so you want to talk. Any other questions?
Yeah, we do have another question from Michael. He says, with the suppress function, are there different levels of permission that can be set up? I.e., can I set permission levels for different users? And I think the answer to that is yes. And I think that may be the one I may be covering later on.
Yeah, when we go over like we'll be going over user preferences, but there are permission groups. Let me find. So these are the managed groups and then manage user access. So you put people in groups. So you can change the permission levels for a group based on the types of records. So you might see in there various things about resource records. And you'll see that basic users can't suppress. And you're like, okay, I want to keep that, but I also want to make sure our archivists can suppress records. So you might want to go into that group. I can't really go into that now because we have to keep going, but this is where you would go and you would edit these groups to give them various permissions. But you must be at a system admin level to really edit groups and create them. So I say try it out and see what works best for your institution. All right, any other questions before we get into notes?
So far, I don't see any other questions. Yeah, I think we're good.
Awesome. So now we'll be adding notes to this collection. So we're going to go to the notes here on the side. We're going to click it and it will take us there. So what notes you add depends on you as an institution. You can look in DAX and see that there's general notes that they recommend based on the level of access you were providing and what type of process you're doing. So here in ArchivesSpace, you will see that there are, I think, around 20, and these are all like EAD notes. So they map to EAD. So you'll see that you have the ability to add abstract, your biographical historical note, your conditions governing access and use, as well as various others like scope and content and processing notes. So we're going to first start with the biographical historical note. When you select a note that you will be creating, different parts will appear based on the note, like we saw with language of materials in the language subrecord. So you'll see that it has persistent ID and you can change the label. If you don't change the label for this, it will appear as biographical / historical note, both on the public side and in your PDF and exports and stuff. So we're going to call this the biographical note because it's about a person. General practice for me is to call papers / those about people and families biographical notes, and those about organizations and institutions like universities and such historical notes. But how you write this and label it is totally up to you. And as you can see, you can publish this here, and then we can add content. So we will go back to simple description, and there's a lot of description here. We can see as we read through that we have here all of this, these paragraphs that are about his life. I hate that I can't get, sorry guys. I don't know why it's not letting me do what I want. Aha, so we're just gonna copy one paragraph for now. So we can copy and paste into here. And you'll see, based on what you're using, that you may need to do some editing. That's why Notepad is great, especially for text. You may want to edit and do spell check somewhere else, but we don't have really spell check in here. So it's great to do these outside of here. And if you copy from Notepad, you'll be able to see it better and it will format a little better. These are also mixed content enabled, so you can do tags. So if you have publications you're writing that you've written in here, you can italicize those. You can add links to websites, that kind of thing. You can also add a subnote. And with biographical notes, you can add a chronology, a defined list, an ordered list, and then more text. So if you want to do a timeline of this person's life or this organization's like history, you can choose that and add. You can title the chronology, and then you can add events. So this is how you would add that kind of information if you want to do a timeline, which is great for like people who have done things for a while, like they have a 50-year career and you want to make sure you hit the key points and that people can see it, you can add that here. So we have created a short biographical note, but we've added it. And then we will add a note, and we're going to add a scope and contents note. And this, for those who may not be aware, is really about the types and formats in the collection overall. You can add these types of notes at any level of the finding aid. So if you want to get more specific in your series, you can, and be more specific about the materials in there. So it's like, oh, there's correspondence, photographs. We want to make note of that here and the subjects and topics in it. So we'll scroll through and we'll see that we have this paragraph that says the collection comprises correspondence, medical and military files, artwork reproductions, audiovisual materials, print and slide photography, collage, artist book, a scrapbook, and press materials. So that is our note. And we're gonna copy it. I'm going to paste it here in content. For this one, I'm just going to leave the label of scope and contents. That's the label I want. But if I want to change it, I could change the label. And so you would just keep going and adding notes. You'll see on the public side that there is a button for citation once I show you that. And that you add that through the preferred citation note. And here you would add content and it would be like cite as, or you would add it in Chicago style, MLA, however you want to have that listed. And this content would be able to give people something to use for citation purposes. I'm just going to add some information. Then I'm going to save the resource. So those are various types of notes you can add. As I said, there are about 20 of them that you can add at the collection level. If you have something that you want to add, but none of these notes apply to it, there is a general note. And this is for things that, as I said, you don't really know where to put it. And so you add this general note, you can give it a label, and then you can add the content. And if you don't label it, it will say just general. But this way you have a note for something very specific, like we want to acknowledge who gave us this data. So we write as acknowledgement and add that content. So just know that you have general note. If you add processing information here and you don't want people to see it, I would recommend not having that published, because that processing information note will publish if you publish all and that kind of thing. So, but there is a repository processing note that won't be published if you choose. So we've added notes, we're good there. And we have decided that we're just going to make this accessible at the collection level so people can be interested and ask us to view this collection. So we're going to just press publish all. It will ask you if you really want to do this, because from this level, it will publish this record and any sub records, so the date, the extent, the notes, and all components in the hierarchy. which means your series and subseries. We don't have any of those, so we are going to, so we don't have to worry about that right now. But as we move forward, I'll give you some like tips on the publish all button and unpublish all. So it's published, and you get a nice green box that tells you it's been published. And then you also see that view published has appeared. And when you click on this, it will open a new tab, and indexing takes a moment. So you may click on that and it say that record can't be found, because that's your instance indexing it. But for us, this is a quick instance, and we are able to see this collection overview. Once we add information, like add the series and files, that will appear here. And I'll go back to this once we've talked about it, once we've been adding things to the hierarchy, and you'll be able to see collection organization. But here we have scope and contents note, the dates, biographical note, extent, language and materials. This is that information we added to the finding aid data section of the resource record that appears here. So know whatever, most of the fields in that section do publish, but there's not a publish checkbox in that section. So if you don't want people knowing who authored it or the status, I would recommend not using those fields and just using those required fields, which is language of description and script of description, because people need to know what language it is. It also gives you repository details at the bottom, which is just a repository thing that you do in that types of records, which will not be going over, but is available in the Help Center. You'll see that we now have the citation button. It gives you two different citations for the collection and then like the item description, which includes the link to this. The request button, which allows you to request the collection, print, which will download a PDF, and then staff only, which will take you back to the staff side. You see the identifier, the repository, collection name. We'll go over some more of this later on. Okay, so before I get into building on this hierarchy, do we have any more questions?
Hey, Brittany. So
Yes.
we have, I've been trying to answer some questions in chat here, but one of them that I didn't get to quite yet is, let's see, do you have time to demo how to italicize a title, for example?
We can do that towards the end of the workshop.
Okay.
If that's okay.
That sounds good. And it seems like Nikki's having a bit of trouble. She is trying to save a resource, but she's having a problem in the date section. I can go back and forth and see what's up with that.
Yeah, so just quick, for dates, remember that's conditional. It requires it requires a label, expression. So it's either expression or you and type, or type with begin and end. So you have to do label and type, but if you have an expression, you don't have to do begin and end. But if you don't have an expression in the expression field, you have to do begin and end. So just remember that, and that might be why it's not saving. I hope that's clear. Do you have any other questions?
So far, I'm not seeing any, and I am also checking the Q&A section. So if anybody here in the workshop, you want to use the Q&A capability, I think they can.
Yeah.
But yeah, also feel free to use the chat, whichever you're more comfortable with.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll move on to updating a hierarchy and adding to that. We are taking a break at 2:10 Eastern time, so we might have to pause then and come back and finish it up, which, you know, I don't like, but we'll see what we get to. So as I said, when you save a collection after the top level collection level, you get some additional buttons. And one of those is being Add Child. And you also get this handy area that you can move up and down. This is where your hierarchy starts forming. So it starts with this top level collection, level record of the resource record, and that is your parent. So everything after it is children, and siblings of those children are children of them. So it's like a family. It's a family tree that we're building. So we're going to add a child to this parent, and all records after the top resource record are called archival objects. So you'll hear that a lot. Series are archival objects, subseries are archival object records, and folders are archival object records. So that's just what they're called in ArchivesSpace. So archival object records require only a few things. They require a title or a date as title. So those are conditional, because in archival objects, dates can be titles. That's the exact thing. So if you have correspondence and you organize them by date and they don't have names or anything listed on them, that can be the title, but you wouldn't add it to the title field here. You would add a date and then that would become the title in the finding aid. So it would be both date and title. And then the only other thing is level of description. So we're going to start by creating our series. We'll see that we have correspondence, and we have several folders of them. So we're going to create a series level for correspondence. You have here something you don't have in the top level resource record, which is component unique identifier. This is something you at your institution can decide how to use. A lot of the time, this is used by other institutions to identify the series level. Like this is series 1, this is series 2, A, B, that kind of thing. You can write it in Roman numerals, Roman numerals, numbers, that kind of thing. So we're going to call this series 1 with a number, but I could do capital I for Roman numerals. And then, so that will, on the public side, identify this as series 1. And the levels of description will choose series. That is all that is required of this record. If you add sub-records, like the ones listed on the side, those, of course, will have additional requirements as you open them up. But for us, that's all that's required. So we're going to either click Save Archival Object, which will save this record and keep us at this level, or we can click Save. We can click +1, which saves this and opens up a completely blank record, an archival object record that is at the same level in the hierarchy. So that means that if we're creating series, this is at the series level. So if we click +1, but we were going to add this first folder rather than add the next series, we can go ahead and add the title, and I'll show you what you can do to fix that. So we have this information. We're not going to give a component unique identifier, but we are going to give it level of description. And then we're going to go through other aspects of this, and then I'm going to show you how to get it out of the wrong level of the hierarchy. So we're going to scroll down. Say you want to add a language. This is in English. You can add that here. You want to add dates because that's listed, and you list that on your folder. So this is basically when you're adding folders, it's what you've listed on that physical folder or the files in your Born Digital material. So we see that we have 1974 through 2014. I'm going to put that in expression. Add the inclusive date. So this functions very similar to how we were creating the top level of the resource record. We're going to scroll down, and here's something that you will want to consider when adding files and folders. Files and folders are the same in ArchivesSpace. When you add something at the file level, that is your folder level, just FYI. So you're not finding folder in the dropdown for level of description. file is what you're looking for. So we're going to add container instance. So in ArchivesSpace, there are two types of instances that you can add, and these refer to the physical and digital versions of your materials. So a container instance refers to the box and the folder that you have put your materials in. Digital objects, which there's recording of digital objects and creating those on the ArchivesSpace YouTube channel. That refers to the digital materials. Oh, this is a born digital file, or this is a digitized image, and you want to add that instance to your finding aid, you would add a digital object. But we're just going to go over container instance. So container instance, while you're creating this, you may have the physical box in front of you. Think of that manuscript Hollander box, the blue one with a tab, and you want to make sure you get this in here and that you know what box the correspondence is in. So you're going to choose the type, and this refers to the type of materials in that instance, in that physical container. A lot of people mix up their content. So there might be a folder of correspondence and a folder of photographs in here. So you might want to just choose mixed materials just to be on the safe side rather than having to look at all the folders you see. Are these floppy disks? Are these microfilms? And then you add your top container. If you've already created a top container, you can search and it will show you that, but you have to have created them for this resource record for them to appear. So you can browse and create top containers. I'll go over browse after we've created one. So this top container refers to that manuscript box, that oversized box, that kind of stuff, not the actual folder. It's referring to the top level of the physical item that is storing these materials. So you can see that you can add a container profile. So if you browse the container profiles, there are already some listed here. They're listed by name, the dimensions, and how the extent is measured. So we know this is a legal size document box. These are measurements from Hollander. We know this is the one it's in. So we're going to link that to our container profile. If you're interested in learning more about containers and space management and all that, please attend the space management workshop. There's one happening at the annual member forum that I've mentioned. It will help you better manage your space. And then the other thing is the container type. This refers to what is this physical item? Is it a box? Is it a carton? Is it a frame? Is it that flat file sitting over there because we put all our oversized folders in a flat file? This is where you can choose that. So we're going to choose box, which is in a legal document box. And then the only thing required is an indicator. So we're going to choose one because this is the first box we're in based on our description here. Barcode is if you barcode your items, you can add that number here. This is the ILS holding ID, and then location. We aren't going over locations today, but please look at other workshops that go over locations. Just know that locations can only be added to top containers, and you would add them here or go and edit your top containers to add them. So just be aware of that. So we're going to create and link this to the top container. So now we have box one created and linked here. And then we're going to choose our child type. So this refers to the folder, or if it's just items in a box. So it's just a framed item, we would choose that. So we will choose folder from here because we know it's folder one. We'll put the indicator as 1. And then if you wanted to get down to item level, you can choose grandchild and choose item here and say it's item 2, or just say that there's item and then the name of the item, give an indicator for it, like a 1, 2, A, B. But if you choose a type for child or grandchild, you have to give an indicator. But just be aware that you can also do a barcode for child. So we're going to say save archival object. And then we know this is at the wrong level. You'll see that this is created, we have the instance, and this is at the wrong level. So we'll go into enable reorder mode. That allows you to move things around. We will drag this to over correspondence. You can also right click. Well, actually, you can also click move and you can move it up or down. You can also cut and paste. So we're going to drag. Sorry about that, guys. So we'll take a break right after this. So when you drag it, you'll see and click on another item, you'll see that you have the option to add items before, as children, or after. Before and after, we'll just move it up or down and keep it in the same level of the hierarchy. Adding as child will make it a part of that series, so you know that this is correspondence in the correspondence series. So this file is a part of that. And you can do that with other ones as you build the hierarchy. So if you messed up, you can enable reorder mode and move things around. And when you're done, just click disable reorder mode. It has saved this for you. You don't have to click save to save this hierarchy. You're good. But you can go through and edit this or move on with adding child, or if it's the same level, you see now that you can add a sibling. So yeah, and that's it. So we can take a break now, and then I think after that, we will continue by doing rapid data entry and answering questions. Hi, everyone. We are back now and ready to get going on the next part of the agenda. So we will be going over rapid data entry next, a form of getting records, archival object records added to your resource records quickly rather than entering them individually. And then also load via spreadsheet, which is the bulk import tool. So first we'll go over rapid data entry. So as you can see in your sample description, that we have several series here that you can use to do exercises. And you'll see that they have several folders associated with them. So we want to add all the correspondence files to the correspondence series, but don't want to individually enter them. So we'll go back to the correspondence level of the series, because when you click on rapid data entry and save those, it adds children to the level of the hierarchy that you are in. So if we were to add them from the already created file, they would be children of this file, and then we would have to go through and move them in order for them to be in the right level of the hierarchy. So we're going to click on rapid data entry. So this is something that you can use, as I said, to add more data. It has pretty much all of the fields that are generally in an archival object record. So you'll see that it has 33 columns. We don't need all of that for this. So we're going to remove some of the columns from this. So we're going to move basic information. We don't need community identifier. We don't want language script. We want the date. We don't need extent. But we want instance. But we don't need notes. So it allows you to add notes and all that. So like an archival object. I will say that this is something that will also time out, and you will need to save before leaving your computer, or it won't save this work and you'll have added all these without. So keep the number of rows that you are creating to small manageable amount. I usually try 10 to 20 and do it based on series. So we're going to add level of description. So you'll see that everything in blue is considered sticky, which means as you add rows, that whatever content is in that column will copy to the next row. So if something in this column is not the same as the previous row, you want to not make that field sticky for all columns and rows. So we will change expression, label, begin and end. And we will also, those can stay sticky. So we're just going to keep sticky things that we know we want to keep sticky. So like the level description, these will all be files and such. As you go through, you will see red appear, and those are the errors, like you see when you try to save something and it doesn't save because you're missing something. this is it working to validate the records as you go, the fields as you go through. So making sure you're aware of what's required. So we're going to back to our sample description. I'm going to copy this over. And we're going to make sure we have that there. And then we're going to, that's not going to be sticky because the titles are not always the same. We're going to scroll down to English. This is not something you can type ahead in and it will appear. So it's great to keep this sticky if they're all in English. Then we're going to add the expression, which is 1945 through 2012. The date type is inclusive. The label, which we want to keep sticky, which is creation. This is a standard one. This is when the item was, the materials were created, 1912. And then we'll go through instance type. So we'll have mixed materials. We can type ahead here in search, and we see that box one's already created. But if you need to create the top container, you can. And then child type, we'll add folder. We'll keep that sticky. An indicator will be 2. That's the next one. Okay, so we've added our first row. Time to add rows to it. So you can see that you can click down and type in how many rows you want. So say we just need 5 more rows. You can type that here. You can move it up or down, or you can just click the green add row, which will add a single row each time. So we'll click add rows to add 5. We'll see that it's added all the sticky information, so file, English, inclusive date. So all those columns remain sticky. And so all we have to do is go in and add these titles and the dates and make sure we add our folder. So we'll go back to this one. Copy that. Add this. Add our expression. Make sure we get that undated in there, which is the DAX way of writing no date. Like if an item doesn't have, our materials don't have dates. So we'll say 1922, but in beginning and end, you can't write text, it's only numbers. So you can't add undated to that. If I have undated as the only date I have, I do put it as inclusive and just don't add begin and end dates. I just have undated in my expression. It's really up to you if you want to add circa dates. It's best to have circa dates rather than undated if you can date your item. But that is based on your institution and your institutional policy. So it's up to you. So this is folder 3. So we'll go back and we'll add next one. So we'll that column. Then we'll make sure we have folder 4. Just so we are just done with this, we can delete rows. So you can say you can delete by clicking on the X and clicking the X again. Once it turns red, that will delete the rows. You can also validate your rows by clicking validate down here. That will turn everything that's red to green to make sure that it has been filled out and all required fields are done. You can also, let's see, fill columns. Fill columns requires filling them with data based on various things. So you select the what you want to fill, like say, date type. And you would choose that if all of them are going to be inclusive, you would say inclusive dates and you would apply that fill. And every row that is you would fill it with inclusive dates. But then you can also do sequences. So if you know that every folder, like every child indicator is the next one, you can say it's from 4 to 6. and it would add those, and you can also preview those. So we'll tell you that for the 3 rows, your child indicators would be 4, 5, and 6, and then you can apply that sequence. So we'll do that for you. And you can add prefixes and suffixes as well. So that's a way to quickly add data to these columns, especially if it's something that is the same for all columns, but you forgot to make it sticky, or if it's just sequential, like numbers or letters, you can do that with the filled out and fill column. You can also reorder your columns. I accidentally clicked save. This is what happens when you click save. It creates children under the level that you chose. So we now have files for folders 2 through 4 of correspondence. So we go back into rapid data entry. If you were just in rapid data entry, it will keep the columns that you had visible. It will keep that like format, like how you had it. This will not be the same if you log out and come back a day later. It won't do that. But you have the ability to save this as a template, give it a name, saying maybe correspondence. Remember, this is saved across repositories. So in any repository, someone can access this template. You can say save, and then when you go to apply a template, you can click correspondence, and that template will appear. Or you can reset, and you'll get all visible columns. Go back, apply, or you can remove your template, and you can delete them if you don't want people to use them. It's not needed. So those are your options. If you scroll down, you will see some basic information about the various buttons and tools you can use in rapid data entry. I will say that rapid data entry is a good way to add data to your finding aid. It's not the quickest. We'll have to show you the quickest. But it's good for those who want to still work in ArchivesSpace while creating the records, and who are maybe creating small finding aids and just wanting to add this data to the series, and they just want that to be quick. You have listed all your series or your files, and you just want to add them to these columns. There's that. So just keep this in mind when you're creating your finding aids. Are there any questions about rapid data entry before we move on to the actual quicker way to do it, to add archival objects?
Brittany, I'm looking through the chat and through the Q&A, and so far, no questions.
Awesome. So let's get into load via spreadsheet. Give me 1 second. So we're going to click cancel here to get out of this. Let me make sure. I can't remember. So I'm going to search for a record because we have to add load via spreadsheet from an already existed resource record. So you have to create the top level of a resource record in order to import a spreadsheet. So first, actually, let me show you how you can access the bulk import tool. So if you are on version 3.2, at least version 3.2, it may be one of the ones before that, but definitely 3.2. If you go to the gear menu and go down to bulk import templates and click on that, you will be brought to the bulk import templates page. And on here, you have the ability to download CSV and Excel files to create bulk imports for accession records, assessment records, archival objects, which is the load via spreadsheet, and digital objects, and then digital objects for archival objects via load via spreadsheet. And you can do location. There is a digital object CSV, which is separate and doesn't not apply to importing it through load via spreadsheet. It's importing it through background jobs, which we'll go over later. So from here, you can go to for the Lovia spreadsheet, you would either go to bulk import archival objects, AO, CSV. You will see what it is for, and you will click download. This will give you the CSV version of the file. But if you work in Microsoft Excel and you want to go to that version, you would go to this one and click download. It will download based on the browser and operating system. So if Mac or Windows, it will download and you can open it based on what you have that opens Excel files or CSV files. For me, I have Microsoft Excel on this computer, and we will go to that. I'll switch screens. But you can also get to here a different way. So if you don't have version 3.2 and you want to get to the bulk imports, first, easiest way, go to the sandbox and go to the bulk import page, templates page from the sandbox, because it's on the latest version, and it will be on the latest version as it gets updated. So you will have access to these. If you can't do that for some reason, you can also go to GitHub. I didn't want to Google search. Anyway, you can go to the ArchivesSpace GitHub. And from ArchivesSpace GitHub, you will be able to download. I don't know why I didn't. You will be able to download the bulk import templates and other templates like the CSV. So here's the one for archival objects. You can download those, and the ones for digital objects, as well as the other ones that were mentioned, and also on the bulk import templates page. So we'll put that in chat. Do that. Oh, thank you, Corey, for putting that in chat. And so we'll go back, and I'll search for the collection I need and then show you what the template actually looks like. There we go. So we are going to be importing the archival objects for the Marie Corelli collection. We're going to go into edit. And then before we do all that, let's see what this looks like. So you should be seeing a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet. This is the bulk import spreadsheet. Corey, let me know if it's not visible.
Yeah, it is. The text is a little small. I don't know if you might be able to zoom in a bit.
I should be able to. Okay, so that should be a little better. Please let me know if you can't. Thank you. So here is the bulk import for archival objects. You have the ability to add archival objects of series, files, subseries to your resource record. You can add it just doing one series at a time, or all series and all files and subseries associated with the resource record. At a certain point, this will take a while because this is a background job. So you want to think about how many rows you're adding at a time. You might want to not go over 1,000 just to be safe. But these can do large finding. It has essentially all the fields and subrecords you would have in an archival object in here. So it does have instances, and you can add digital objects, but you're limited on what you can add for digital objects. And to see more about digital objects and bulk import, check out the recording of that workshop from a few months ago on the YouTube channel. So as you can see here, this one's already filled out for us. To start with, you may want to look at the documentation that's associated with it. This just gives you some notes on the spreadsheet, but you also see that there's information at the top. So there are certain rows that you should not delete, such as you shouldn't delete or edit this row, and you shouldn't delete or edit row 5, because these are what helps map the EAD fields into ArchivesSpace. The recommendation is to always hide, don't delete, or add, unless you know what you're doing. Because this is EAD, you may not be aware of what you need to add or what can't be deleted. So always just hide columns and rows rather than deleting them, unless you're working on this bottom ones and you're adding data. Feel free to delete those rows, but 5 or above, just hide. Just so you make sure it imports correctly. So the first thing that's required is either the EAD ID or a resource URI. To get the resource URI, you would go to your resource and you would copy the link from the web page and put that here. EAD ID is just shorter and you can add it and just copy it down. You can also do that with the URI, really up to you. You can add a ref ID if you want. This is the component ID for it, but that's not required. Then you need title or date. Remember, that's conditional. And then you can add the component identifier. And then another thing that helps you to build this and is how it creates this hierarchy is this hierarchical relationship here. So this refers to its level in the hierarchy. So 1, so it tells you that 1 is the first level, and then 2 is second, 3, 4, and so on. There is an example test import out there that goes to level 11. You may have seen it around. It does know what Arc imports. So it's just a lot of animals, turtles all the way down. So 1 is like your series, and then 2 can be that subseries. And if you're adding files to the subseries, those would be 3. And then when you start with a new series, you start over 1, 2, 3. So that way you're making sure it's being associated with the right series and subseries and files. You can choose in this to publish or not, true or false. These are true or false statements. And you'll see that you can select that here. Description level is also something that you can select. And this is all the descriptions available in that part of the archival object, and it is required. If you choose other level, you would add that information to the other level section of this spreadsheet. And then as you go through, you can see that there is dates. We added dates, we added date type, and that colors change depending on what sub-record this is a part of. You can add extent. You can add instance. So we see here that we have instances. So we have the top container and we have the container indicator. Don't worry about the green. It's just telling me that the format is weird, but that shouldn't mess with it. And you can add child type and child indicator. You can add multiple instances, so you can have 2 instances. And then you can add your digital object. So see here, this is not all the digital object records if you're familiar with them, but it does give you the ability to at least create and link to that digital object. You can add agents and you just keep going, the subjects, all of that good stuff. So now we've seen it and it's already filled out for us. And we're going to go back to ArchivesSpace and we're going to import. Okay, so we're back in ArchivesSpace. So from the resource record top level, we're going to load the spreadsheet. Now, if you were doing this based on series, you would still do it from top level. Or well, if you're adding files to a series and you've already created a series, you can do it from the series level. You can go to the archival object and click the load via spreadsheet, and it will add those files as children. So similar to rapid data. But we're gonna start, this one just has the top one. So you can see here that we will select the file. It should be in my download. And you'll want to save as something you recognize, like based on the identifier for the collection, the name of the collection, and keep those somewhere in your like servers or file system that you know these are the files that get imported into ArchivesSpace. But that is institutional practice and up to you how you do it. So you can see here you have options. So you can import archival objects, which is what these are, or add digital objects to archival objects, or link top containers. This will add top containers to your archival objects or whatever they're associated with. So if they're at the collection level, series, file, wherever you put your top containers, you can link them. And that's a separate spreadsheet, which I'll show you how to get to in a second. So we will say import archival objects because that's what we're doing. But if you need to change, and that's what we imported. Then you can choose to only validate. And that will validate these records, making sure there are no errors before importing. So that way you know to fix them before you spreadsheet. So if you choose only validate and click import spreadsheet, it will take you to the background job. It will go through the background job. And then when it's done running it, it will tell you, oh, we're unable to do this because we have an error in our container instance type. So we have to go back into the spreadsheet and we have to fix that in order for us to add that. So whoever is, when you're using this example from the Google Drive, which I will update it here soon, I will, you may want to fix that when you're working on this, just so you have an error free, but it is good to validate to begin. So we're going to go back to this. And so here is what it's talking about. We're going to scroll over here. So it wants us to add these. So that is the type of instance of the mixed material. So there we go. We're going to save it. Then we're going to go back and we're going to import and make sure that it works. And close out of this. Go back to load via spreadsheet. We're going to select our file again. Open. We're going to validate just to be on the safe side. And we see we don't have any errors. So it will create all of these archival objects, which is great. So we can close out of this and we'll close out of this to refresh the page and then load via spreadsheet. This time we're not going to validate, we're just going to import the spreadsheet. It will always go to a background job. So you can do other work as this background job is running because some of these are quite large and it will take time. But the smaller ones don't take much time. It will give you that log, but also since we created these records, it will show you the new and modified records that have been created. So if we go back into the resource record and we click close, it will refresh and it will show you what's been created. So there you go. So one thing I forgot to mention, and then we'll get into questions. So I was mentioning unpublish and publish all earlier. So if you are in a series and you don't want a series to be published, you can choose to unpublish that whole series and it will only apply to the record you're on in the component records of that below it. So it won't apply to collection, top collection level and the other series. So this is new as a version. At least version 3.2, you can unpublish specific portions of the finding aid, and you can publish the specific portions of your finding aid. So if you have a whole series that's restricted and you don't want published, you can choose to unpublish it or not publish it, that kind of thing. So this allows us to have all the correspondence unpublished, but then we can click publish all and it will publish all of them. So that's just a handy feature. And you can do it with subseries. individual file, that kind of thing. And then the overall collection are just series. So any questions about, well, creating resource records? Because after this, we're getting into importing and exporting. And we have time at the end as well to discuss questions that may come up about resource records. So we do have Q&A at the end.
Right. So Julia asked, how would we show a series in the spreadsheet? Would we make it the hierarchy? Would it make the hierarchy number 2 instead of number 1?
Okay.
And I did respond to that, but I don't know if you wanted to show that or not.
Yeah, so I can show it real quick, just so everyone. Okay, so when you're creating a spreadsheet and you're adding a series, if you're starting with the series, that would be 1, because that's the first level of the hierarchy after the top level, which isn't in this. So it's like that's number 1, and then files or subseries below it become the next number. So we're say series audiovisual. So you can add multiple series to a spreadsheet. So we're on series 3. So that would become 1 again, rather than 2 or 3, because if we say 2 or 3, we say 2 is at the same level as the files written above it. If we say 3, it becomes a child of the files, which in terms of description, that doesn't really make any sense. So we would choose the description level. Sorry. We choose the description level of series here. Let me do some more. So that way, this is at level 1, so it's a series. And then when we keep going, when we say we have cassette, and these are items or files, we say that's 2. We choose the right, I hate that it says that. Okay, there we go. We choose the right description level, and that would be the child under it, so it would be 1 level below in the hierarchy. So if once you restart a series, it's 1, and then you go to 2 for the next level after that. And 2 always indicates a child, and anything below that would indicate children of what's above it. I hope that goes with what you said, of course.
Yeah, I think that was a good visual demonstration, because I certainly get confused sometimes as well. It's like how the hierarchy is structured, but yeah, I think that makes sense. We did have another question in the Q&A. It was, if you want to use other level, and I believe that's in the description level dropdown. So if you want to use other level, are we required to specify what that is? And if so, is there a controlled list of the acceptable values?
So other level, if you do choose it, you need to put something in the other level basic information. I can show it both in the spreadsheet and what it looks like if you're creating a record in ArchivesSpace. So let me show you in the spreadsheet first. I will say that other level allows you to add any like made up like a level, description level. So technically there are sub-series, but some people go below sub-series. So you can say sub-series. So this, you type what you want that level to be called, and other level allows you to do that, because as you can see, we only get the sub series and such here. So that is why there's other level in here. And then it's to show if it's required or not, it's better from the archive. So if you're in here and you add a child and you're creating a record and you go to the description level and you choose other level, when you do that, it opens up a new field. And that, as you can see, is required because you need to name this other level. But this is a free text field. There are no controlled values for this list. So this is where you can say sub series. So if you keep going, like you have a photo album and you have the photographs and then you have items within the photo album and you want to make sure you've listed all these things, like it's just turtles all the way down, basically. Those would be sub series items, that kind of thing. So really it's what you name those other levels after subseries, file, that kind of thing. And if it's not listed in here, you use other level to define. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think that was good. Looking to see if we have any other questions. I also want to be mindful. We do have another question. And does the other level specified field show up for the user?
Oh, yes. And it will show up as the label that you gave it. So it's time for imports and exports. But before we do that, Corey, I'm just going to quickly show them the public side with the hierarchy.
Okay.
Let me publish all. And then Corey will take over. And then after that, we have another break, and then we can answer some more questions and get into other things. So this is the public side of this finding aid. You can see now that we have the ability to see collection organization, container inventory, and then we have the collection organization on the side. And then towards the end, we'll go over more of what the public user interface is like. But I just wanted you to see what this translates to on the public side. So Corey, it's all you. You can take it away. I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay, thank you very much. Round of applause, everybody, for Brittany. She's absolutely amazing. She actually helped teach us here at the UGA whenever we were implementing ArchivesSpace. So super great. Go ahead and share my screen. Brittany, can you see that? All showing up?
Yes.
Okay.
You might want to zoom in a little.
Zoom in a bit. Okay, I can do that. We will go 200%, zoom and enhance. So I may go a little bit over time, about 2 minutes or so. I'll try to do my best to keep it within time though. So I would like to cover, 3 different parts, about 5 minutes each. The first part is going to be importing records into ArchivesSpace. And the idea behind this is, let's say you have some EAD files that have been sitting around for years in like an old database, and you are wanting to migrate that data into ArchivesSpace. Well, ArchivesSpace allows you to import that data, and it's can be anything from resources to accessions, digital objects, subject agents, locations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But because we're focused on resources today, that's what we will focus on. So in order to import a resource into ArchivesSpace, first thing you'll want to do is you'll go to Create, go all the way down to Background Job, and go to Import Data. Now from here, we'll have sort of the setup for the background job, and the first thing that you'll want to make sure that you do is you want to set your import type to match the information that you are wanting to import. So for us, let's say, for instance, we have an EAD XML file of a resource with a bunch of archival objects associated with it. I will want to make sure to click the EAD portion. But as you can see, there's a lot of different stuff. Quick note, the only difference between EAD and Mark XML bibliographic that says resource is that the Mark XML one is just top level information. EAD can contain top level plus a bunch of archival objects associated with it. So I'll go ahead and click that. We'll then add a file here using this button. Hopefully you can see my screen here. And I will choose this And this is the same EAD file that you found in the Google Drive. You can queue up as many as you want. So you can also drag and drop files. So if you wanted to import 20 or 30 EAD XML files or any sort of files like that, you can. You can also delete them from using this little trash can button. After you get that ready, you click Start Job, and then we cross our fingers, hope that nothing goes wrong. But if something does go wrong, that is okay. This will start up a background job and a log file. This will run for a little bit. And this log just basically goes through all of the steps. It creates a lot of text. It's a lot of information. But eventually it'll create, all of the archival objects, the top level resource level information. It'll import any new subjects or agents that are associated with that EAD file. And it'll do its thing, starting to clean up. Once it's completed in the top left, we just click refresh page here. And voila, woo, no errors, great, fantastic. So here you'll see under files, it'll give us a link to the file that we just uploaded, but on the bottom here, it says new and modified records. These are all of the information that was just imported. And as you can tell, it was a lot of information. These are hyperlinks, so you can click these to take you straight to the information. If you do encounter an error, it will detail that error in the log screen, so you can try and troubleshoot it from there. Also, if you are queuing up 10, 20, 30 files at a time, if at any point there is an error that occurs, any other files that have not yet been imported will not import. So as soon as there's an error, the job stops and it says, nope, can't go any further. You need to fix whatever you need to fix within your XML file. You can also check previous jobs by going to Browse Background Jobs. You can filter by job type. So in this case, we just imported some data. You can see we just completed one, and we can even look at those that failed and take a look at what happened there. I'm going to now quickly move on to exports. So exports, if you want to, take your resource record that you've worked on and you want to export it as an EAD XML file, just like we imported one, you can export that same thing out of ArchivesSpace. We here at UGA, we export our resources as EAD XML files because we host our own finding aid website. And so we take those XML files and put them on that website to do our own public user interface. So in order to export a resource, what you'll do is you'll go ahead and just navigate to the resource that you want to. And also, I apologize. I know chat is probably going off now. So I'll just let chat go and we can answer it later. I will then click into one of the resources that I want to export. You can click view or edit, doesn't matter. And then as you see here, on the top right, we have an option called export. Export gives us 5 different options. One of them is download EAD. As I just hover, so I'm not clicking it, I just hover over the download EAD button. It gives me 4 different options on the right here. This first one, include unpublished, basically means that if you have both published and unpublished parts of your resource, be it notes, archival objects, whatever, when you export this particular one, it's just going to export everything, regardless if it's unpublished or published. Include DAO tags. That just means that if you have digital objects associated with your archival objects in this particular resource, those will export in the file as well. Use numbered C tags. This just means that, as you have a hierarchy, you have your series, your subseries, and your children, this will actually number those those tags to indicate the hierarchy in the file. So your top level series will be C01, the children below that, C02, C03, all the way down. Lastly, there's the EAD3 schema. the EAD defaults to EAD 2002. So if you want to override that and say, no, we do things in the EAD3 schema, you can checkbox this and you can go from there. For me, I'm going to checkbox the numbered C tags because I like that. And then whenever you're ready to download, you just click download EAD, give it a hot second, and voila, there we go. Your browser / operating system of choice will show it in your screen. A few other options are download MarkXML. This is just going to download the top level resource information, and you also have the ability to include unpublished. You can download the container labels, which just means if you have a bunch of containers within a particular resource, you can download those, and as I believe it's a tabular, a TSV, not a CSV, but you can open it in Excel or Google Sheets, doesn't matter. It should look the same. And then finally, you can export a PDF, which is just a standard PDF that comes out of the box of ArchivesSpace. If you want to modify how the PDF looks, that's a little bit beyond this workshop, but you can check the appropriate resources in the ArchivesSpace Help Center or through various YouTube videos. Okay, and real quickly, I'm going to move on to reports. So reports are pretty cool because if, for instance, you want to do some administrative or statistical reporting on resources that you've processed or that are in process or whatever, reports can be very useful for gathering some of that high-level information at the repository level. There are two different kinds of reports. There are your default reports that just come straight out of the box of ArchivesSpace, but there are also, as of 3.2, custom reports, and custom reports are very complex, and I don't really have that much time to cover them in this particular workshop, but I'll give you a brief overview of them and how they work. So in order to get to the report screen, you'll go up here to create, background job, create report. And we are greeted with a wonderful list of all of the different default reports that come with ArchivesSpace standard. As we scroll down, you'll notice that the custom report is one of them that you can do. So we'll cover that just in a little bit. But for now, let's say, for instance, I just want a list of all of the resources in this repository. Just give me a list, right? I can choose this resources list report, and it will give me basic information, dates, and extents for resource records. So I'll go ahead and click select up here. I'm then asked, what kind of format do you want that in? I highly recommend CSV, JSON, and any of the other stuff. It's okay, but sometimes it could be a lot of information to parse, or maybe it's not in a very usable format. So CSV, open it with a spreadsheet, we're off to the races. I also would not recommend checkboxing the linked records in JSON because that tends to add a lot of data to your report that is going to be really confusing. So unless you want to really get into that mess, I'd recommend just staying away. Click Start Job. It automatically starts the report. And just like background jobs, it takes us to the same looking screen here with a log and all that stuff. I click refresh page, and then I go down to the files section here, and I click this button to download the report. For custom reports, so let's say, for instance, I'm looking through all of these default reports, and I just don't really see anything that's going to get me the data that I need, right? I need something more. I need it a bit more complex, a bit more sophisticated queries. Custom reports, if you're using ArchivesSpace 3.2, might be the solution. So you can go ahead and click select on the custom report, and you'll be greeted with the prep for a background job. There are now two drop-down lists. The first one is for a template. In order for you to create your custom report, you have to make a custom template. You can do that by clicking the Create Template button up here, and then once you create it, you save it, and you mess with it. That then will show up as a drop-down list of things that you can add here. Also, you can do your format. Again, I recommend CSV, and then you can click Start Job. And just very briefly, a couple of really important notes for custom reports. I will briefly go into creating a template here. When you are creating a custom report template, keep in mind two things. This limit field, try to keep it as low as possible until you absolutely need to, because setting it at 50,000 might be a bit too much and might break ArchivesSpace. The second thing that I'll point out is scrolling very bottom here, these linked records. Be very careful if you checkbox any of these, especially something like archival objects. I can't see them right now. Just because that will add a lot of data to ArchivesSpace and it might overwhelm it and break it. So just be a bit careful when you're messing around with custom templates, but I do highly encourage you to mess around with them. Just make sure to start small, start carefully, and build up as you go from there. Okay, so yeah.
I can.
Awesome, cool, thank you so much. We had a request to see the import process again, so a bit zoomed out this time. I apologize if I was a bit too zoomed in. So we'll go ahead and quickly cover that, and then I will cover just the last few points on some ArchivesSpace features that might help you either create resources a bit more efficiently or make some modifications just tangentially related to resources. So, oh, okay. Actually, I think Melanie said, don't waste time covering it again. Okay. Sure. Yeah. If you do have any questions about the importing process, I would highly recommend going to the ArchivesSpace Help Center if you have access to that. They've got some great documentation about how the import procedure works, along with screenshots and all that stuff. And there's also ArchivesSpace user group listserv. So cool. All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started with a bunch of small little things that I hope will be helpful, and hopefully get that done with around 20 minutes to spare, probably a bit less than that for questions at the end. So first thing that I would like to cover is user permission levels. So this is the idea that, for instance, you have a student worker or you have a new archivist that comes into your organization and you want them to, start processing a collection and, creating a resource, or maybe just editing a resource, adding, archival objects or whatever to it. You would want to make sure to set the appropriate permission levels for that person so that they, don't go off the rails and start modifying ArchivesSpace uncontrollably, but just so that they have enough to be able to do their job and get all that information in there for you. So after you create the user's account, you will then be able to assign them to one of 6 default user groups. If we go here to the scrolly wheel up to the top right, we click on that and we click on Manage Groups. Yes, I do want to leave the page. And I believe Brittany briefly showed this off. There are 6 default groups that you can give people to give them certain permission levels. So there are a bunch of different ones. I'm not going to cover them all in depth because there's a lot of permission levels. But if you are a system administrator or you are a repository manager, you should be able to see this setting within your ArchivesSpace instance. And one other thing that you should be able to see is the edit button. And when you click on that edit button, that will give you a much clearer understanding of what specific permissions each group has. So up at the very top, it gives you the description. You can edit this if you so choose. You can also choose to add or remove members up here. So if I wanted to add the basic, if one of our users' name was basic, I could add them to this specific permission level right from this screen. I can also choose to remove anybody. That's what this screen at the bottom here is. This is kind of the really relevant information. These are the very exhaustive list of all of the permissions, all of the things that this particular group can and can't do. So if you're scratching your head thinking, well, I've got this student worker, but do I give them basic or advanced user access? My general advice would be start them out at the lowest permission level, and then work up from there as they need more responsibilities. But you can also use this to double check to see, okay, this is what I want them to do. For instance, I want them to create and update resources. Or I may say, I don't actually want them to create resources, but I want them to update resources. So if you go back, you may want to check out the basic data entry user group and check to see what are some of the permission levels there, and they can still create a resource, but you can sort of check that out as well. You can also do the same thing. So you can also assign groups to users in another way. If you go up to again, to the scrolly wheel, I call it the scrolly settings wheel, sorry, up to manage user access. This is where you can take individual users and you can assign them groups from here. So if I had a user, again, user named basic, because why not? I can edit the group that they're in just by checkboxing what particular group. And you can assign them to multiple groups, but for clarity, I just recommend keeping them one at a time. And yeah, there is one other role that I do want to identify, and that is the system administrator. You might notice that this has only 6 roles and the system administrator is not on one of these. That's because that's handled at the user, screen. So if I go to system, and I kind of click fast there, system manage users, then I go in to click edit. If I wanted to grant system administrator privileges to a particular IT person to help me troubleshoot ArchivesSpace, at the very bottom here, you see here, grant system administrator privileges. Only system admins can grant other system admin privileges. So you have to be a system admin to give system admin permissions. And I would highly discourage you from giving away these permissions willy-nilly, only to those people that are technically need it, because system admins can do everything everywhere across all of ArchivesSpace. So just be very careful about that. The next subject that I want to quickly cover are default values. Default values are fantastic ways to cut down on entering repetitive information into resource records. So for instance, let's say we have an archival practice of a standard identifier for a resource. We have like a standard prefix that I just want ArchivesSpace to just keep the prefix and just let me add a number to the end of it. So that is something that I could do in ArchivesSpace. The first thing that I would need to do in order to set that up is to enable the default value feature. So how do you do that? Well, the first thing that you need to do is make sure that you are either a system administrator or a repository manager. Either of those permission levels can do this. You then want to go to the top right where your username is. My username is admin. And then click the drop-down box here. You will then select repository preferences. Okay, and I will cover the preferences in just a little bit, but here in the general settings, we want to click pre-populate records. This enables the feature to allow us to create default values for our resources, for instance. So I'll click that, I will click save. Those are saved. Okay, now that we have that feature enabled, I will go to Browse Resources. And at the top right, you'll notice this very handy feature that I think Brittany did show before, but I'll show it off again. And that is the Edit Default Values. If you click on to Resource, it will then give you the standard resource page that you've seen quite a bit in this workshop. And so from here, I can, for instance, enter, we are in the Allen Doe Research Center. So I'm going to say the, oh, thank you, Firefox, ADRC MS, and I'm just going to presume that our archivists will fill out this third box with a number of some order. I'll then go ahead and click save, and we will have a default value. However, I want to point this out. If you now say, okay, great, I'd like to create a resource now. Well, if you do that, you might have a bit of a hiccup. You'll notice that though we just created the default value, it's not appearing for some odd reason in this new resource. Why is that? That has to do with your user preferences. That's my clever way of transitioning into the next topic. So if we go up here to the top right, again, next to our name, to the drop-down arrow, you see that we have 3 different options for preferences. The first is global preferences. That applies to preferences across all of ArchivesSpace. That is only available to system administrators. So if you're anything lower than that, you shouldn't see that option at all. Repository preferences are preferences that apply only to the repository. Pretty simple enough. And user preferences are preferences that are specific to that user. Now, the reason why that default value, that default ID value wasn't showing up for me is because if I click into my user preferences, which I'll do here, you'll notice that it's almost the exact same screen as the repository preferences pages, but you'll notice that the checkbox that we made at the repository level, this pre-populate records, is unchecked. So you do have to keep that in mind, that and this is kind of one of the quirks of ArchivesSpace that is made for good reasons, is that user preferences take priority over repository preferences, and repository preferences take priority over global. So it kind of goes from the bottom up, right? So if a user says, I want this specific setting just for me, ArchivesSpace will say, great, that's fine, you get your way, but the repository preferences will not affect that unless, you know, you're able to, yeah, unless it's not set to that value in the first place. So now that I have checkboxed this pre-populate records, I'll go ahead and click save. I can go back to creating a resource record. So I'll go to create, I go to resource, and then ta-da, there it is. My identifier is now pre-filled with some wonderful data that I can now stop typing in repeatedly for the thousands of resources that I have to make. So that's very simple. If you want to turn off default values, all you have to do is uncheck the pre-populate records box, and that should stop any records from populating from there on out. If you spawn a resource from an accession, and this is something that we covered at the very beginning of this workshop, the default values will not apply. So the default values only apply when you are creating a brand new, completely vanilla resource. And now I'd like to go take us back, go back to our user preferences, because that is the next topic we're going to cover a little bit more in depth. Realize I'm saying that and running a bit out of time, but we will try our best. So user preferences, again, they take priority over repository, repository over global. Some of the general settings that you could see, you can checkbox any of these. One that I find particularly useful and that we do at UGA is this publish. This just means that any new resource, any new archival object, any new accession, any new digital object that you create will default to publish. This is convenient for us because sometimes we forget to publish certain things and then they don't show up on our website and we're scratching our heads like, why isn't it there? It's in ArchivesSpace. It's because we forgot to hit publish. So, we're a bit more explicit if we want something to be unpublished, to be able just to click that on that particular record. Another useful thing is the note order. This is the case where if I, for instance, love my note orders in a very particular way, I can use my mouse, and I apologize if this is a bit too small. Do let me know if I need to zoom in a bit. I can take my mouse, click and hold, and drag these anywhere I want, and in any order that I want. So as if I sort of get the order that I want, then I can go back to the resources. And if I will actually go back to the resource and show you real quick. I need to go to edit. Do need to edit on that one. I'm going to go to the notes section. Notes. You'll see over here on the right-hand side, apply standard note order. This is the case where I've set my note order in my preferences. I click that button and it sorts them in the way that I want. So it's just a bit of a faster way to get the notes in the order that I want. Lastly, let me scroll all the way back up. Go back to user preferences. The last thing are search and browse columns. So actually, I'm going to go all the way down to the resource browse column. You'll notice that whenever we were browsing the resources, the search list, we had certain columns available to us, things like title, identifier, level. All of that stuff can be modified. So if I wanted my first column to actually say identifier, but my second column to say title, I could change that. And I can also add 2 additional columns to the standard 5 if, for instance, I wanted to see who are the processors of that particular collection. And I can also change the sort column, the default of that, and the sort direction, ascending or descending. And the same thing can be applied for just standard searching in ArchivesSpace. If I'm just using the search box and I get my list of results, I can change how those results, what columns those results display, and all of that information. The last thing that I will mention that might be a little bit helpful is controlled value lists. Controlled value lists are those things that Brittany was showing you where you click and they have a drop down of a bunch of predefined values. So things like extent types, date types, instance types, container types, all of that stuff. You can some of it you can edit in ArchivesSpace. If you want to do that, you have to have either system admin, a repository manager, or a project manager permission level to edit these values. So in order to do that, let's go ahead and you'll go up to System, click on Manage Controlled Value Lists. This will give us a very blank looking screen, but under list name, this is the another large drop-down box where it'll give us an option to select from a bunch of different drop-down values and lists. For our sake, we're going to go all the way down to resource finding aid status. And I picked this one in particular because this drop-down box is configurable, meaning I can mess with it. And it's not essential. Well, it is essential to ArchivesSpace working, but I can do more things with this list than I can do with others, and I'll show that briefly. So for instance, I have my resource finding aid status terms. I can create a new term. So if I wanted one that didn't already exist, I can add that here. I can also change the position of which these occur. So, I click the drop-down box and I want the first thing to say under revision. For whatever reason, I can change that here just by clicking these arrows, and it's a bit clunky, but it gets the job done. I then have, I'm going to skip these 2 columns, all of these different buttons, wonderful colors, set as default, just sets that particular value as the default for the drop-down box. Suppress basically means don't show this to anybody that can't see suppressed things, which basically just means your high-level permissions. You cannot suppress something that is already in use. So we are using the completed value in one resource somewhere, so we can't suppress it. We can merge it though, and this is the case where if I wanted to merge completed value into published because I'm a madman and I like chaos, then I could do that. I would just make sure that I would have the value that I don't want anymore to merge into the value that I do want to keep. And that will transfer all of those resources that are already associated with the previous one into the new one. And I can just outright delete them if I want to. An example of something that you can't actually edit that much is a non-configurable is, well, this isn't the one I was expecting, but the note index type. You'll notice that there are far less options. I can set it as default, I can suppress, but that's it. You can't really do much with some of these lists. The last thing that I'll mention before we get into Q&A with controlled value lists are please keep them cleaned. Don't go bananas and just add a bunch of extent types. We here at UGA, as we were doing our migration from Archivist Toolkit to ArchivesSpace, we had over 200 different extent types. And that's too much. It's way too many extent types. So we went through a project of just cleaning up just extent types so that our processors had an easier time just picking out what was the appropriate extent type that we wanted for our resource. So instead of having a drop-down box of 200 items, it was just 10 or 15. And I think that's about it. So I want to leave us plenty of time for questions. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And yeah, we can jump right into the Q&A.
Yeah, feel free to put Q&A in the chat or the Q&A feature. So we do have a question from Nikki. What is the best practice for creating top containers that are shared across resource and accession records? For example, we keep artifacts from different collections in an oversized box. We'd like to have a list of top containers for our artifacts boxes populated in the pull down menu before we create all the resource and accession records. That's a good question. I'm trying to think here. Corey, do you have any thoughts for?
That's a stumper right now. I'm just trying to think of, I'm trying to think of some examples that we might have here.
Okay, so there is let me share my screen. So you may use the same box for multiple items. Is that what you're saying? Like and they're shared across resource. Yes, okay, cool. So there is a handy feature called Manage Top Containers, but also there is a way when you are adding container instances. So when you create a container instance, it's associated with that resource to begin with and that resource only. But it doesn't have to remain that way. So when you go into container instances and you add a container, you fill out all the information. You may have already created a container for a different resource or accession record. And you know that this item is in that same container. So when you go to this top container, you're not creating a new one, you're browsing. And sorry, I meant to show this earlier, but now we get to show it. So when you're in top containers and you're in the browse, you can go to the resource or accession record, and you can type the name of that collection. Let's see. You can do keyword search, barcode search. You're just trying to find this container. So whatever way you know that this container is, you can search for it, and then you go search, and it will show up, pull up all top containers related to that search. And all of these are in this legal document box. That is indicator 1. You may want to change the indicator you're using for these boxes. So make sure that the container type, indicator, container profile makes sense. Like you may want to call the container profile oversized artifact box and create a profile for that and have the indicator be A for artifacts or just 1 for the first artifacts box, that kind of thing. Just make sure this information makes sense. But you can select whichever one if you want to link it to, click link. And now when you save this, you will have both materials from this collection we're in now and the Richards the Holt collection indicated that they are in that top container. And then when you go to view the top container, you can see all the linked records. So now you see there's not just Richard's the whole collections found in this items. You now have this correspondence archival object from the Marie Corelli collection too. And I hope that helps, because you can like screenshot this and get all this information out. And then as well as going to manage top containers, you can go in here and you can look for a specific container. So if you look for specific container profiles, like say you look for that profile for that artifact box, you can see all records with that container profile, or all records, all the container, top container in the Richards the whole, that kind of thing. And this helps you to also update them. So you have the ability to do both operations, which you have to select them. And that includes adding locations, merging your containers, and updating container profiles. I highly recommend checking past recordings of that include using top containers and locations, as well as checking out space management. Can't emphasize it. It goes over this stuff as well. So yeah, I'm glad I was able to get an answer for you. Any other questions? And this can be about anything to do with resource records and creating them, editing them, customizing. We'll give it another minute or so, but we don't have to keep you here until the end of the hour. So feel free to type your questions in the chat if you have any. Feel free to ask your question. We'll see if we can answer it. Nadia. The sandbox is always available. So the question was, how long will sandbox be available for practice? That is something that is open to everyone, not just members or people participating in workshops. It's available through the ArchivesSpace website. That's the and with that link that you've been given. So it gets updated every week. So you can add data and edit the data in there, and then it will go back to how it was, usually on Sundays. So you would go to the homepage and you would click on Sandbox to get to that. It's both public user interface and the staff interface. Oh, so the question is, if you spawn a resource record from an accession record, and the accession record has an instance, do you keep the accession record published or do you suppress it? Does it get confusing to have a single top container connected to both an accession record and a resource record? So yeah, that is a practices question, but I think it depends, because it may be confusing if you have your accession records published on the public side. But if you went ahead, in general practice with us, if we've processed a collection and we've published this resource record, its accession record is going to be unpublished, so people don't see that. But when you're spawning, it's not going to move that top container over. You're going to have to recreate the top container. So yeah. And when you recreate it and that's been published, I would recommend unpublishing too, just to be on the safe side. Yeah, but if you're publishing it without the top container, you may want to think of it a different way. So I would talk to people at your institution, decide what would be best practices for you. But yeah, top containers don't transfer over. And if you're interested in what does transfer over with an accession record when you're spawning into a resource record, check out the Help Center or past recordings. So we have another question. Can we put URLs in a note field, so website addresses and such? Like, yes, you can. You would need to use the tagging. Yes, the extra element. So you can tag and link. I've done that when linking with finding aids at other institutions of related materials, as well as for related materials in the collection itself. So we have repositories, we know we have related collections, and I want to link to them, so I use the related materials note. I would use that tag to add the URL so people can go back and forth. Like, oh, I see this is related collection, click on the name of it and see that finding aid. I'm not certain what the tag looks like. I can't go to the back end of this one anymore, but
No, yeah, I think you need an href attribute.
yes,
in that
the
Kindle.
href.
Yeah.
And and the show and the show is like to get the target and the new. So there's a few things that have to be added. I would look up tagging.
Yeah, there's a resource that I was using for EAD tagging and for the EAD 2002 schema that was pretty useful in consulting it. Because yeah, I don't I don't use EAD tagging all that often, so I'd have to like figure out, oh yeah, this attribute works for that. But
yeah, I think so. The fields are mixed content enabled, so you may want to search for that in the Help Center, or search for EAD tag. So, and tagging. And then there's like Corey said, there's resources out there. Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to talk and I'll see if people put something in the chat. So I want to first say thank you for attending this workshop. We appreciate you guys taking the time out of your day to learn about ArchivesSpace. Please go into your agenda and fill out the evaluation form. That just helps us know what we need to improve on and what people are liking. So we love to have the feedback. So that is linked in your agenda. Also feel free to practice the exercises in the workbook using Sandbox or your own instance. And this is being recorded and will be shared later, not immediately, but later. So expect to hear about that at some point from ArchivesSpace. And if you ever have a question, feel free to reach out to ArchivesSpace through the ArchivesSpace home at lyrasis.org email address. If you are a member, you can get technical support from the website, and there's information on that via the website, and you can use the Help Center. So yeah, thank you for attending. We hope you all got a lot out of this about resource records. Feel free to attend the next workshops that are coming up during the ArchivesSpace annual member forum. They will be happening at the end of August. There will be one on space management and then another on rights management. And those are for ArchivesSpace members. Oh, I'm not sure. We'll reach out to the community engagement coordinator for ArchivesSpace, Nadia, to see if we can have the names added. But you can also just put our names in a notes field if you need to. But I'll reach out and let her know. So thank you. So yeah, you guys have a great rest of your day and a great weekend coming up. Okay, good to know. And yeah, thank you for filling out the form and Have a good one.